Hi, this is our first video for this class, and this time I decided, because we were running out of time, but also because we are really thinking about this use of technology in the classroom. I'm giving you the directions for the lesson plan on video, and the best way to do this will be to have the directions that are posted online on the Blackboard site, inside assignments, inside lesson plans, just to make sure that you have the directions in front of you and you can follow with me and understand the details around it. So the first thing that I want you to think about as you think about the lesson is that I'm not providing you with the mandatory format. What I'm interested in, regardless of the format you use, is that certain components are there in every lesson plans. They must be there. And so you can use whatever your cooperating teachers asks for. They usually don't, but if they do, that's okay. Or your supervisor, if you don't have one, you can use one from a previous class. I have attached a sample of one that we've used before. It's a fairly simple one and a straightforward one based on Madeline Hunter's that you can use in this class. You can, you don't have to. It keeps saying optional, and I mean it. The first thing out of the components that I'd like to focus on are goals, standards, and objectives. Goals are the general descriptions around what does this lesson target. So it's a general concept. For example, comprehension monitoring strategy. That's a general mode. It's not very specific. That is the goal. There might be a secondary goal around comprehension of I don't know, human environments for the content, because often even in reading series we do have some content goals as well. Then I'd like you to pull out from the Department of Ed's website the standards, the Nebraska standards that are covered in this lesson. There's usually more than one, and many times at least 3 or 4. If it's in social studies, it might be even more, but that's okay. Don't just give us the numbers, give us the whole piece, and you can cut and paste. You don't have to rewrite it. But we need the state standards. And the third piece that is very, very important are the objectives. And objectives, if you remember, have to be observable, have to be measurable, and have to have a criteria to them. So the students in the class will produce a writing about Martin Luther King that's at least 3 sentences long with 2 strong adjectives. That's one way. So we have a writing piece as the goal, and we have a length, 3 sentences, and we have another criteria, which is how many adjectives. That's one way to do it. You can also talk about percentage of words spelled correctly, or a number of questions answered correctly, or number of items recalled from a comprehension passage, whatever it may be. So you can think about what is appropriate for your lesson. And we usually have more than one objective, rarely more than 3 in any one lesson. Now in multiple lessons or longer lessons there might be more. The second component that needs to be is more structural, and that is the opening. And in the opening you're really looking at how are you taking this lesson and make it obvious in kids' mind the ways it is connected to previous lessons you've taught, or your cooperating teacher taught, or whoever. So connecting it to what has already happened in the classroom and they've learned. And many of the lessons we do are actually one in a string of lessons around a similar topic or a theme. So those connections are very important because they situate things in kids' mind, they open them to learning, they activate all the parts of their brain that are associated with that topic, which would make them perform a lot better and remember a lot more at the end. We want to assess previous knowledge when it's appropriate, and that doesn't mean that you have to assess everybody, and it doesn't need to be in a formal way, but you may want to get an idea of how much they know about this topic, especially if it hasn't been taught recently. So you're thinking maybe last year they've been taught this. I've seen that in lessons, for example, about homophones. We haven't touched it this year, but you may have had multiple lessons about this last year. So let's hear what you remember, and remember to hook them in to motivate them to want to learn this. And that's sometimes a trick because the lessons are not always hyper interesting, as we've talked about before. In sequence of activities, we do want to hear about materials, we do want to hear about specific objectives for each one of the activities. So if you have an activity there, it's got to have a reason. It's got to be one of your objectives or something that motivates them, but make sure it's well reasoned and not just, hey, it would be nice really to cut little triangles and make hats. That's great, but if it doesn't mesh well with one of the objectives of the lesson, that's not useful. It can be fun, but not useful. So really think about, what are my objectives? How do I meet them? Strategies. One of the hardest things for students in the past was to understand what we mean by the word strategies. So here it is. Strategies is the things you're teaching kids to do that will help them learn on their own. So for example, you can have them practice doing a graphic organizer, let's say a Venn diagram. But making them go through it and explaining it is one thing. Making sure they understand, when do you use a Venn diagram? What is it good for? When would you use it somewhere else? Elevates this from just, let's feel a Venn diagram together, to let's understand what a Venn diagram can do for us when we write, when we read, whatever it may be. So the strategies are very, very important because that's what elevates learning. Because think about the themes we have in our books. I mean, nobody really remembers those stories. And it really doesn't matter if you remember those stories, right? I don't remember any stories from 4th grade, let's say. And what I've learned there is really how to read, how to take these concepts and put them back together in a way that I can process. That's what we want to do with kids. It's that strategy of the doing. Not just the facts and the knowledge, but the actually, how do you do things? Think about the ways we think about Bloom's taxonomy. You know, there's all of these levels, and we want kids to know, and we want kids to do, but we want them to be able to understand the conceptual stuff behind it, the strategy of how do you do this on your own. Differentiated instruction, I talked about this in class, but I'd like to reiterate this. In differentiated instruction, identify the students, no matter what the title, no matter what the label, students who you think in the classroom will either not meet objectives or can meet so much more. Then you need to differentiate for them. Name the student, tell us what you think the concern will be, and then what is the specific plan for that student, or that sometimes the whole group can have the same thing, but have a specific plan tailored to the strengths and challenges for that student. That is crucial, and we will ask you to reflect on that. So that is important to plan, so you can do, so you can tell us what happened. Assessment has to be tied into the objectives. So each objective has to have an assessment. And if you have an assessment that doesn't meet any of the objectives, one would wonder why you would have that assessment. So make sure that all of these things line up. Objectives, activities, to assessments. Assessments do not mean tests necessarily. They can be, but they shouldn't always. And they do not mean that you are creating worksheets for everything. It can be oral, it can be observational, it can be questioning students, it can be looking at the writing. There are multiple ways to do this. So don't get hung up on one way. Make a way that is as seamless and as natural. The one thing I'm asking you to do is find a way to record it. Even if it's oral responses, make sure you've got a way to record it. And if you're asking only a few students, make sure you take a cross-section of the classroom. Some such students who are very high achieving, middle of the room, and kind of students who often struggle. That'll give you a sense at least of how the room is doing. Closure or closing. All lessons must have closing. It's one of those things that because of time management we drop out. I'm asking you to do this. Research has shown time and again that just like a good opening that ties it to what happened before, good closure that summarizes and ties it to what will happen next is as important in making sure that students actually retain everything. So if you're running out of time, it's better to stop early with the activity and wrap up well than to just let the lesson kind of decay into the next thing that somebody else will do. The two tests I'm asking you to do, the Zealand test says if you put your lesson plan in a bottle and let it drift down the ocean, and somebody finds it in Zealand and opens it and reads it, can they do it? Is there enough detail there so another person can use this lesson plan? If yes, you've got it. If not, add detail until it's complete. And the soccer test, connected to the thing I said, objectives, activities, and assessment. It all has to line up, all leading to your goal. Okay? And make sure you look at the rubric as well. It's available online at the same place. And as I said, there is a lesson plan format, but remember, it is not mandated. It's just a suggestion if you don't have anything else required or better. So, you have all the information, I hope. If you want to ask me more questions, email is fine, as is Twitter. And so, until next time, enjoy.